Hello, friends, and welcome back to Malicious Compliance Stories. Let's start our video with a story about a mother who faces a tough choice between preserving her 4-year-old autistic son's treasured collection of toys and maintaining relationships with her best friend and family. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with the turned-on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. Here we go. I installed a lock to protect my son's room from destructive kids. Quite simple. For my 4-year-old's room, I purchased a lock. Despite just being 4 years old, my son is really good at collecting stuff. He's autistic. He possesses nearly every Monster Jam monster truck ever produced, every action figure of a superhero, DC, or Marvel that you can imagine, and he enjoys putting up these enormous marble runs. In my son's opinion, everything should be neatly arranged and stored. The issue is that my nephew or my best friend's kids visit, they immediately head straight to his room and destroy everything. They literally ruin whatever item they can get their hands on, from tearing off the legs of the action figures to tearing off the tires of his monster trucks. These kids are effing terrible and will destroy nearly anything they touch. And I'm not even talking about typical wear and tear. The marbles get lost and wind up all over my house. Additionally, one of the children will not stop touching his collection of squishy toys, and each time he bites a hole in one, destroying it. To attempt to avoid this, I used to go through his room and hide things before they arrived, but I've had enough and told them they're not permitted in my son's room anymore. They can play with the hundreds of toys outside, the enormous bin of toys I have in the living room, etc. Naturally, it didn't go well, and the kids began to act up since they knew what was in his room and that the toys were boring and they weren't good enough. And both my best friend and sister are accusing me of being overly dramatic and dismissing them as toys. However, these toys are pricey. We spent hours constructing the marble run just to have it destroyed the moment they entered. And he gets extremely unhappy about it when everyone is left. The room is ruined and all his toys are shattered and missing. I think that's right. They claim that I'm teaching him to be avaricious and not share, but I don't agree. They should, in my opinion, teach their children to be respectful of other people's property and to not get upset when they're denied something. If they were at all respectful about it, I wouldn't mind if they went in there and played with the items, but they've repeatedly shown they are incapable of handling it. They no longer want to bring their kids around because they believe I'm being rude, but I don't give a damn. You should teach your children to share, in my opinion, but not everything has to be shared. You can retain some things for yourself. Update. I've recently come to the conclusion that these children are monsters who will always find a way to be awful regardless of the circumstances. She permits them to do anything in her own house. She says she doesn't, but if she were telling the truth, the children wouldn't behave that way. I love my best friend, but I detest her children, so I'm not sure how to handle it without destroying our 15-year friendship. Update. Since September, I haven't spoken to said best friend. My life has never been more tranquil, yet it's a shame that a friendship of 15 years has ended. My nephew's also much better. You're not wrong at all. Sharing's important, but not at the expense of your son's belongings and emotional well-being. Your son's toys are his passion, and it's reasonable to protect them from destructive behavior. The visiting kids clearly lack boundaries, and it's their parents' responsibility to teach respect, not yours to fix their behavior. Blocking access to your son's room's a fair response, especially after repeated damage. If your sister and best friend refuse to understand, that's on them. Their kids need to learn respect, and your priority is creating a safe space for your son. It's sad about the friendship, but peace at home matters more. You've set healthy boundaries, and there's nothing wrong with that. And our second story. My dad turned into Karen at a Chinese buffet. To set the scene, my dad, who's in his 60s, was raised in an orphanage in a tiny rural town. Therefore, it's because his worldviews are more than a little off that they appear somewhat off in this scenario. When Dad's birthday arrived, he decided to have a Chinese buffet for the family celebration meal. I went to a little backstreet Chinese restaurant with my 2 stepsisters, stepbrother, brother, stepmother, step-grandparents, and 2 other couples. It's the type of restaurant where the food is served in large quantities in the middle and you can fill your plate as you choose. In contrast to most buffets we visited, this one lacked the stack of brand new clean plates. Instead, an elderly Chinese man would periodically circle the tables, replacing dirty, empty plates with clean ones before returning to the corner, sitting on a chair, crossing his arms, and closing his eyes for 10 minutes before repeating the process. This is where the issue started. Most of us continued to use the same plate, so it wasn't a problem that fresh ones hadn't been sent for a while, but since his dish was covered in a flavor sauce that he didn't want any more of, Dad decided he needed a new one. After glancing at the man dozing off in the corner, he made the decision not to wake him and took the arm of the next Asian man to pass. The conversation went as follows. Dad: "Hey mate, can we please grab some fresh plates?" Asian man, AM: No," waving his hands in front of him. Dad: "What do you mean no? I just need a clean plate." AM: No, sorry." Dad: "No need to be sorry, mate. I just want an extra plate." Sister 1: "Dad, I don't think..." Dad: "It's all right, I've got this. Can we please have some fresh plates?" AM: But no." The poor man's now flustered, as not only can he not get his message across due to the language barrier, he also can't get a word in over my father's urgency for a clean plate. Dad: "Just grab us some bloody plates, mate. It's not that hard." AM: I'm like you." Dad: "No, you bloody aren't." AM: "Yes, like you." Dad: "If you were like me, mate, you'd get your job done and grab us some plates." By this point, several of us have picked up what the Asian man was putting down, but either couldn't get a word in or chose to sit back and let Dad make an idiot of himself. Finally, the poor man managed to shout over Dad with, "I'm customer." The whole table burst out laughing as Dad turned to us and mutely apologized, saying he thought he worked there. He then asked why no one had brought that up. After grinning and waving at everyone, the man went to his table, where I'm sure he had a lovely time telling his wife why he was unable to return to it earlier. The cherry on top was when my stepmother yelled over him, "Sit down, she's got a plate of lemon chicken," and Dad, seeing a young Asian girl going by, said, "I'll ask her," as if he'd found the solution. It appears that Karen may be my dad's true name. Your dad's accidental Karen moments, both hilarious and a bit of a facepalm-worthy tale. The fact that the poor man couldn't even get a word in to clarify he wasn't staff makes it even better. It's such a sitcom moment. Your dad ramping up the urgency for plates, oblivious to the growing awkwardness. And the twist? I'm customer. Absolute gold. The moment with the young girl afterward just seals it. Your dad probably thought he was redeeming himself, but nope, doubling down instead. At least he seems to have a good sense of humor about the whole thing. Sounds like a dinner to remember for sure. And our last story. Karen tried to claim she owned the house she rented. When I was a kid, my family used to live in a large countryside house surrounded by a lot of land. Once my older siblings left for college, my parents realized the house was way too big for just the three of us, so they sold off the house and part of the land, but decided to keep a smaller portion to build a cozy little home. A few years later, we moved to a city a couple hours away, leaving the new house as a weekend getaway. Eventually, my parents decided to rent it out to cover the upkeep and property taxes, especially since it had a great location and a stunning view. That's when Karen entered the picture. Karen and her boyfriend signed a lease for the house because it was close to her workplace. From the start, my parents were upfront about their plans. They intended to move back into the house when they retired, which was still a couple of decades away at the time. They promised to give her ample notice when they decided to reclaim the property, and in return, they asked that she also notify them well in advance if she ever wanted to move out. The lease also included a clause about some of our family belongings being stored in a locked room in the house and in a small shed on the property. My parents promised they would always let Karen know before dropping by to retrieve anything, ensuring they wouldn't intrude. For the first few years, Karen was a decent tenant. She paid her rent on time via checks, though she didn't bother maintaining the yard and smoked inside despite it being against the lease. My dad let it slide to avoid unnecessary tension. Fast forward 12 years. That's when everything started going downhill. Karen's checks started bouncing sporadically. My dad would call her and she'd apologize, claiming it was a mistake, and then quickly fix it. But over time, the late payments became more frequent. First every couple of months, then every month. My dad finally had enough and decided to address it directly. During the call, Karen completely blindsided him. She argued that because she had been paying rent for over a decade, she essentially owned the house. My dad was stunned. This came out of nowhere. He reminded her that it was a rental agreement, not a rent-to-own deal. Karen went off, yelling that she'd put so much money into the place over the years and that she was the one maintaining the house. Spoiler, she wasn't. She even threatened to take him to court, claiming squatters' rights. Where we live, tenants do have strong protection, so my dad decided to hire a lawyer to ensure everything was by the book. During a meeting with Karen and the lawyer, it became obvious she didn't have a leg to stand on. The lease clearly stated it was a rental property, and all the documents, including property ownership, were in my dad's name. But Karen wasn't ready to give up. She continued living in the house without paying rent for several months while the eviction process played out. When the time came to remove her, the police had to get involved, and it turned into quite a spectacle. She threw a tantrum on the front lawn as her stuff was moved out, yelling about how unfair it all was. In the end, the house was finally free from Karen's grasp. My parents decided to rent it out to a relative after that, just to avoid another nightmare tenant like her. Wow, Karen really redefined entitled tenant. It's one thing to have late rent payments, but claiming she owned the house after a decade of renting? That's crazy. Your parents showed incredible patience by letting the smoking and yard neglect slide, but Karen clearly mistook kindness for weakness. The whole squatters' rights argument's wild, especially when the lease and property ownership were so clearly documented. Kudos to your dad for handling it calmly and legally, even when Karen escalated things. Must have been satisfying to watch her baseless claims crumble in front of a lawyer. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.